What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Bible Wisdom YouTube channel. I wanted to make a video on a little bit on the topic of not judging, and I just wanted to kind of put into perspective a little bit a point in James chapter 2 verse 10, and I think this could be helpful especially when reflecting on our own life as Christians, and when we compare ourselves to non-Christians, and the whole topic of heaven and hell and things like that. I have come to the conclusion that there are just some things that we just won't understand on certain topics until we get to heaven. But let's dive into this James verse, and I think I really thought of this, from a clip in this movie that really brought this out. And so let's check it out. So James chapter 2, we can start at verse 8. Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you are committing a sin. You are guilty of breaking the law. For the person who keeps all of the laws except one is as guilty as a person who has broken all of God's laws. And so maybe I can read verse 11 too. For the same God who said, "You must not commit adultery," also said, "You must not murder." So if you murder someone but do not commit adultery, you have still broken the law. And so, and actually, I'll read one more too. Verse 12. So whatever you say or whatever you do, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. There will be no mercy on those who have not shown mercy to others. But if you have been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges you. So, I just wanted to bring out that point in James chapter 2, verse 10, when it says that when you break one law, you're as guilty as someone who has broken all of the laws. And so I think, sometimes, I know for myself, when I think of, comparing myself maybe to other people or something like that, or when a news article comes across and you see a crazy story on the news, we sometimes have this mindset of hey, I'm better than that person, or I haven't really done anything that bad. And I think God is not necessarily saying that the same punishment or something comes to everyone in the same way. I don't think that's what this verse is saying, but I think one of the things that we can draw from this particular verse is that we should not necessarily view ourselves better than other people, even though we may not have committed the same sin, because in this verse we learn that God still views someone who has broken one law, like maybe they didn't commit adultery, but they have committed murder. God still sees it as, a breaking of the law. And as we learn in verse 10 here, it's as the same. If you've broken one law, you've broken them all. And so I think another thing that this verse tells us is that we all have the potential to commit every single sin, that is out there, even though we don't all necessarily make the same choices in regards to sin. One person, has certain sins that they may be more drawn to than another person. And obviously I can only speak to certain types of things, but clearly, someone who maybe murders someone may have a kind of a different reaction in regards to adultery, but yet they don't necessarily see themselves as, breaking the commandment, all the commandments. They may just see themselves as, oh, I have not necessarily committed adultery, but, we can even compare it to anger. You say, hey, I'm an angry person or something like that, but, hey, I'm not a murderer. But, when God sees sin, at least from the context of James chapter 2, verse 10, he sees us all as breaking every law. And so, I think that is just one way to kind of view ourselves as, we all have the potential to commit every sin. And, I think that, when we kind of take that viewpoint of, wow, I can commit every single sin, even though God, does keep us from, committing certain sins. And, again, I do believe that, a certain person is drawn to certain things. We should still be aware of, having that potential to, commit sins that we don't necessarily, view ourselves as doing. One thing that does come to mind is that, we need to, I think, fight the sins that we are definitely drawn to, just because, we can do things that we are not necessarily thinking that we would do. And I think, especially in the book of Romans, it seems to describe sin as something that grows and grows and grows, where, maybe on day one, you don't necessarily see yourself as having a certain potential to maybe steal a car. Maybe on day one you stole a candy bar, but, as you keep progressing in sin, certain things that may seem taboo to you initially sort of enter into your mind later on. And, let's say over time, day 60 or day, 1000 or day 2000, now you're stealing cars, and, the crimes just seem to get worse and worse. And so that's one of the things that I believe, happens over time. And, I don't know if the Bible necessarily says this, but I think that is one of the reasons why we don't necessarily live past 120 years, and I don't really know of too many people living past maybe 110, but I know the Bible does sort of give a date of, we can't live past 120. But anyway, I think God has sort of shortened people's lives on this earth just so he can, definitely control the growth of sin. I don't know. That's just a theory. Obviously, I don't know of any sentence in the Bible that specifically says that. But I think, it's just another reason of, I think this verse in James chapter 2, verse 10 is sort of saying that in a way of like, when you leave sin unchecked, it seems to grow and grow and more. One sin grows into 10 sins and grows into 20, and then now you're guilty of breaking the whole law. And so I think when talking about not judging people, especially I think this can be helpful when we are looking at news stories and looking at things that come across our news feed, and we sort of can judge people like, hey, oh, that's so messed up. I would never do something like that. But yet, and still, you may, again, going back to that stealing a candy bar scenario, your thing could be, hey, I'm going to take this candy bar, but oh, I'm so disgusted with that person that stole a car, or carjacked someone. Now, I have two stories that I think can be helpful in this whole topic of judgment. One, I want to go to what Jesus said, talking about a man who was praying, a Pharisee who was praying. I want to talk about that, and then hopefully I didn't lose my train of thought on the other one. But when talking about judging people, I think that oh man, I think I just lost my train of thought. So I will go to the parable that I can share about Jesus. So Jesus, I think, gave something similar in regards to judgment when he gave a parable that, sorry, I don't have the reference for this specific parable. Hopefully you guys know this story, but Jesus gave a parable about a Pharisee who went out to pray. And this Pharisee was praying a prayer of, God, thank you that, I'm not an adulterer, or I'm not a murderer, and, I don't steal, and, I tithe. And, he was praying these prayers of, kind of thankfulness to God, which is good to be thankful. But the parable was also bringing about how this guy was not humble, and he was also thinking of himself as better than other people. And he even uses a person in his prayer to God, and he says, God, thank you that I'm better than, this tax collector over here, and he was sort of listing all these good things that he is doing, or, bad things that he's not doing. And, Jesus said that he highlighted the tax collector's prayer, because the tax collector stood out and he prayed, Lord, I'm a sinner, have mercy on me. And he was coming from that standpoint of acknowledging that he is a sinner. And so I think, that story could be looked at in a few different ways. And, Jesus said in that parable that the tax collector went home justified before God when he was beating his breast and, saying, Lord, I'm a sinner, versus the other guy who was sort of listing all these different sins that he wasn't doing, and he was trying to say how righteous he was. And he said, that man wasn't justified before God. The guy who was acknowledging that he was a sinner was justified. And so I think even today as Christians, we can sometimes have a chip on our shoulder and sort of, I know that I probably do this, unknowingly sometimes too, where, I have to, try to snap back into place of, hey, God, I'm a sinner, not necessarily coming from the standpoint of, God, I've accomplished this, or, kind of like looking inwardly and not necessarily acknowledging the work of God and the need for God in our life. And sometimes, thinking that we are sort of a self-made person. And, I think sometimes when we are especially viewing others, we don't necessarily acknowledge our own sins. We sort of want to point out, everyone else's sins. And I think as Christians, we can definitely look down on, that person who, murdered 5 people, or that person who, is on the news, just recently. I think it was a senator who was sleeping with the lawyer for Trump or something like that, and she was caught, and we see all these different stories, which are bad. And one thing I want to note is that God is not necessarily, he's not diminishing sin, especially, and obviously, hopefully you didn't come to that conclusion either. But, anyway, I think that, we have to have that sober mindset of, hey, I'm a sinner, and instead of having this chip on our shoulder and sort of thinking that, we are, not like other people. And I think another interesting thing to note is that, we are all still here on this earth together, even though there does come a time where, God is going to separate us. And I think there are definitely, separations between those who are following God and those who aren't, but on some level, we are still, here on this earth, and, we're still human beings, not separated at this moment in time. And so I think, going back to James chapter 2, verse 10, I think it's saying a little bit of all these different points that I've mentioned in this video. And so let's read that again. For the person who keeps all of the laws except one is as guilty as a person who has broken all of God's laws. For the same God who said, "You must not commit adultery," also said, "You must not murder." So if you murder someone but do not commit adultery, you have still broken the law. And so hopefully this video was helpful to someone. I know that, as Christians, we can sort of struggle to put into the right context, I think. At least coming from my own thoughts, sometimes we try to, think about what does it mean to love our enemies, and when we talk about, the evil that is in this world, I think we have to definitely realize that, without the work of Jesus Christ, without the sacrifice, without the light of God, we would all still be in that same boat of sin, especially when I think about, what made me try to, come to the light and change and follow Jesus. I don't know if it was, I can't really point to anything in my life from my own personal thoughts or something that was saying, hey, you need to follow Jesus or something. It was just like Jesus said, he chose us, he first loved us, and we didn't first love God, or we didn't first choose God. And so, I think that's something to remember. One thing that does come to mind is in the book of Peter, when he's talking about false teachers and false prophets, one of the things that he mentions in one of their characteristics, or one of the lists that he kind of talks about, what they're doing wrong, he says that they have forgotten their past sins. And I think that, for us, it's, even though we are supposed to, forget our past and, move on and follow Jesus, and, we're a new creation, it's still, when Peter mentioned that, it's still somewhat important to remember where we came from, and to remember that we are sinners. And I think one thing in that remembering is, I think, to try to remember, okay, I shouldn't make the same mistakes, and if you do, you can at least change a little bit, little by little. You're starting to change how you react to certain things. And I think remembering where we went wrong in our life, remembering, certain sins, I think can be helpful for us when talking about overcoming sin, overcoming temptation. And like Jesus's parable, that, again, sorry, I don't have the reference for that one, but when we think about trying to be justified before God, one thing that we can't do is, hide from God. One of the things when Jesus was here on this earth, it's the gospel says that, Jesus knew what was in men's hearts. And so I think sometimes we don't necessarily always recognize that God knows the real deal about us. And so I think, trying to, stay humble when we are following Jesus is so important. And especially when we, talk about, witnessing to our enemies, witnessing to unbelievers, witnessing to those that are without the light. I think that, even though we should definitely bring out what sin is and explain it, but I think also, we do have to try to avoid arguments. We do have to try to, not view ourselves as, better than them because, of something that we have done, and not necessarily, for the work of Jesus. And, some of it does seem a mystery of why maybe someone, chooses Jesus and another person doesn't choose Jesus. Sometime, at least to us, sometimes these things don't necessarily make sense. And so we can sort of inwardly think like, man, I must have done something better than this other person. I must be, smarter than them, or, I must be, a better person than them. And I think, this book, this verse in James, kind of shines some light on how we aren't necessarily better than that unbeliever, and we weren't necessarily in some sort of better righteousness than them, even though, of course, we all don't necessarily commit the same sins. But clearly, you should probably, get what I'm saying in this video. And so, I love verse 12 of, how it says, whatever you say or whatever you do, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. And so I think this was an eye-opener for me when talking about what commandments do we keep, what role does the law play in our life. I think this verse makes it clear that even though, we are following Jesus, we still do have rules to follow. And, we still have guidelines that we should be looking to keep, because we know that one day we will be judged, according to the things that God has written in his word. And so, there's so much to say about, things that we are doing right or wrong. James says in this book that we all do things that are wrong, or we all say things that are wrong. Now, I don't know if it's necessarily talking about sinful things, but I think sometimes it's mentioning, that sometimes we may not necessarily say something in the right way, or we may not necessarily do something that we should be doing that's not necessarily sin, but it's not something that we could be doing to the best of how it could be done. And so there, I think, are many things that, I think we can do to, stay level-headed as Christians. And, anyway, I do feel like I want to say more for this video, but, I will probably just be, kind of repeating myself. And so thanks so much for checking out this video. For those that did, hopefully you found this video helpful. Check out the book of James. I think it's a great book to read if you haven't done it in a while. I think that, there's so much that is happening in these days, but, we have to be patient for the Lord's return. I think that we have to be patient for, some of the end times events to play out. I think that we have to, understand that God has a plan for our life. And sometimes, the world can look dark, and without light, or it could be almost seemingly godless, like, God has abandoned this place or something. But sometimes I do think that it's sometimes in our mind, a lot of this stuff, just because, during our day-to-day, crazy stuff doesn't always happen. I know it just really depends on who you are and where you're going through, but it seems like a lot of this stuff is sort of, how we feel is a, kind of a reaction to, a lot of these different things that I think are definitely darkness. But, I feel different when, I feel like God is working in my life and working on my heart. And so I'm able to have a different perspective on, certain situations in the world. And so hopefully, when you're feeling dark and you're feeling like, you can't wait anymore for the rapture, I think God can help us little by little to, really endure till the end, and to give us a peace and a joy to, make it until, we see a better day, and when Jesus, comes back and, changes the world. And so, thanks so much for checking out this video. Hopefully it was helpful to someone, and I will talk to you on the next one. See ya.